I said, I have never and would never vote for him. Now it's 2024. I filled out my ballot and yeah, I voted for Donald Trump. So what changed my mind? Hey, welcome to the Cylinder Radio Podcast. I'm Will Roosh, high school teacher and educator in Los Angeles. Today's episode, I'm going to do a breakdown on making sense of the 2024 presidential election. You know, every year that I can remember, going back all the way to the first election that I voted in, which was in 2000, it was kind of seen as this, like, the most important election of all time. And then especially in 2004, I was in college and we were in war at that time in Iraq. So it was like, this is the most important election because we got to figure out this war situation. And then every year, all the way up until 2016, where MAGA came on the scene and Donald Trump. And now it's clearly Trump's world. I mean, the political landscape all revolves around Trump. He has taken over the Republican Party for sure. It's a MAGA party now. But also the Democratic Party is now just anti-Trump. Like, more than even talking about what they are going to do, it's just we're going to do the opposite of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is dangerous. You know, just like on its surface, I have always had issues with Kamala Harris. You know, going back even before she was vice president, when she was district attorney of Los Angeles of California, some of the policies that she had regarding truancy and the threat of locking up, you know, single moms for truancy, her history with the Innocence Project and everything she did to block evidence and keep her record intact. You know, it's just stuff that, you know, the guys from the Innocence Project, they're very, very left wing, and yet they said Kamala Harris is like the worst they've ever seen. You know, I worry about her being a power climber, that she is more interested in getting power than really anything else. And I think that's what you see. She's very politically savvy, so she will kind of go with wherever the trends are leading her in kind of a populist way. But she also, like, sits the fence in so many different areas. Like, she'll speak to a Jewish community and talk about how she's going to be diehard supportive of Israel, and then she'll talk to a Muslim community and talk about how she's going to, you know, support the people in Gaza. And it's like, she's just, it's hard to get like a grasp of really what she wants to do. But because she's like, you know, a black and Indian woman, maybe it's because of just the way that she kind of, you know, presents herself as this like strong person that, you know, when you present yourself that way, you have to prove it. And I have concerns about her being in the room with other world leaders and just trying to like show strength and that she might do something that could get us into a very serious war situation. Now, Trump also shows strength, you know, or he tries to. He's, you know, showing strength is a really important thing for him as well. But I think that he has more experience in dealing with powerful people just in the business world. Also, 4 years as the president, that he said something. I went to the Republican National Convention. I was very fortunate to be invited by the Republican Party of Utah. And when I was there, one of the things that Trump said that really caught me, you know, really grabbed my attention was when he said, like, shouldn't we be friends with the people who have nuclear weapons? You know, he talked about on the Joe Rogan interview, he talked about how he is you know, he's like, you know, I get along with Kim Jong-un really well. And I mean, Kim Jong-un is a dictator, you know, and that's a critique of Trump's, is that he, like, you know, cozies up to these dictators. If he's doing that just to kind of charm them and doing that so we don't, you know, come on the other side as being like a strong enemy, that seems like a good idea. Like, you want to be cool with the people who could potentially be your enemy. But regardless of where you stand, I think that the idea of looking at this as the establishment, which is Kamala Harris, you know, in the DNC, versus the anti-establishment, which Trump is. I mean, it's pretty hard to deny that he is anti-establishment. I mean, the way he talks about cutting down on government, the way that he is rogue and doesn't do what the Republican Party tells him to do. The Republican Party does what Trump tells them to do. So it's almost like the inverse. I think Kamala Harris will do what the party tells her to do, and I think Trump will kind of be the one who's in charge. they both have dangers. With Kamala Harris, you don't know who's really in charge. It's kind of like with Biden, like you don't know who's really calling the shots. And with Trump, very similar, but like the inverse, where this guy is going to just do what he thinks is right, even if the party, even if people who are, who've been in government for a long time and know the way things work disagree. He'll kind of do what he does, But for the Democratic Party to be the party of not listening to the people. The people didn't choose Kamala Harris. Now they're behind her because they don't want Trump, but they didn't choose her. She was kind of chosen for them. And that has echoes of what happened in 2016 with Bernie Sanders. A lot of people wanted Bernie Sanders, but the party, it was revealed in the WikiLeaks documents and things, clearly sabotaged Bernie Sanders and helped out Hillary Clinton, whether it's the superdelegates who all went for Hillary Clinton, or it's the way that she was given questions ahead of time when he wasn't. There was a lot of shenanigans going on in 2016 where Bernie kind of got screwed over. And it seems like the Democratic Party is just not very democratic, essentially. Where the Republicans didn't want Donald Trump, the people want Donald Trump, and the Republicans didn't have... They didn't push to say, like, no, we're going to give you this person instead. Also, they didn't have superdelegates that could go against the will of the people in the same way. So, people are behind Kamala Harris, but they didn't necessarily choose her. So just a few things that I want to address. So for vice president, Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz. Tim Walz, when he was in governor of Minnesota, he was kind of behind some of the more, for lack of a better term, like quote unquote woke ideas being pushed in Minnesota. When it comes to race and trans ideology, which some people are concerned about, and I understand that. But then Trump chose J.D. Vance. Now, I know about J.D. Vance because a student of mine, when his book first came out, Hillbilly Elegy, a student of mine told me about it, and I read it. That was years and years ago, maybe 2018 or something like 2017. And it's an interesting book. And J.D. Vance, one of the narratives that goes out about him is that he's weird. That's like a news story that I heard. J.D. Vance is weird. But then he just did a 3.5-hour podcast with Joe Rogan, and he didn't seem weird at all. Like, he seemed really, really normal. I mean, it's brilliant, but like really, really normal, even on things I disagree with. And it's kind of like the DARE program. I don't know if you remember the DARE program. It was like it's drug abuse resistance education. It was like a drug education program in schools across the country. And one of the things that they did was they would say things like, they would say, if you do drugs, you're going to die, or you do drugs, it's poison, and you're going to feel terrible and die. But then what happened was people went out and they were like, all right, they're at a party or something, these high school kids, and they tried smoking pot, or they tried doing drugs, and they didn't die. They felt good. I mean, that's one of the reason people do drugs. It releases all those brain chemicals, the happy chemicals, so dopamine, serotonin, etc. And then people go, oh, wait, you've been lying to me. Like, that's not true. And then they're more likely to fall into, well, I don't trust the authorities that tell me this thing. And like, if you can say all day that J.D. Vance is weird, but then when you listen to him in long form, you go, oh, he's not weird. It just solidifies that narrative that's going out there about the way that media is lying to us, especially mainstream media, how it's this like propaganda machine for the establishment, in this case, the establishment Democrats. But J.D. Vance seemed very, very normal. And that's something that if you're looking at it with an objective lens, then that would go against the narrative, which is just more of like, going against the narrative that keeps getting put out there. So who am I voting for? I've been saying for many, many years, I did not vote for Trump or Hillary Clinton in 2016. I voted for Gary Johnson. And then I also voted third party, someone who's not going to have a chance, essentially, in 2020. I couldn't bring myself to vote for Donald Trump. I don't think that he's the ideal candidate. And I couldn't bring myself to vote for Joe Biden. It didn't make sense to me. And I, said very publicly, I will never vote for Trump. I have never, I will never. As much as I get labeled like a MAGA person because of some of the stances that I have, I said I have never and would never vote for him. Now it's 2024. I filled out my ballot and I voted for Donald Trump. So what changed my mind? I don't see it as a vote for Donald Trump. I see it as a vote for the people that Donald Trump is surrounding himself by. Now, when it was something like 70% of the American population said they didn't want Trump or Biden when the two of them were running against each other. And people would say like there's 300 million Americans how is it possible that these are our two choices, right? If I could choose anyone of the 300 million, like my top choice for president, the very top of all the people, business leaders and politicians, who would I pick? I personally would pick Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, this is someone that I've had interactions with. This is someone that I met. This is someone that I've been watching for quite some time, going back to her 6 years as a congresswoman, knowing her story, reading parts of her book. She is what I see as like the real deal. I think she has the even keel for a position like that. I think she has a lot of integrity. I think that, she checks a lot of the identity boxes because she's a veteran, because she's a woman of color. I mean, her dad, who is Samoan, was in the South during segregation and had to like drink from the colored water fountain. Like, she is like a person of color. Not that I would vote for someone for that reason, but that doesn't get said enough. So I just wanted to include that. But I would vote for Tulsi Gabbard. That would be my number one choice if someone could run for president. And then she attached her kind of trailer and her endorsement to Donald Trump. Interesting. Okay, so having her around for Secretary of State or someone who's very peace-oriented, but also understands the military, understands the importance of discourse, understands the importance of diplomacy. I think that'd be pretty awesome. And then Tulsi went over, and about in the same week, RFK Jr. Now, I was planning on voting for RFK Jr., and I was public about that as well. He was on the ballot still in California, okay, but he also aligned with Trump and talking a lot about the Make America Healthy Again stuff. It was like, okay, so the guy I was going to vote for now is on Trump. The person that I would pick as the number one choice that I would have for president of the United States is behind Trump. You add in Elon Musk, who I think just for like efficiency, for ingenuity, like having the richest guy in the world who is very pro free speech and just understands how to advance humanity, getting behind Trump as powerfully as he is. He's super on board with Trump now. That's like another win. And then now Ron Paul just recently said that he would love to work with the Trump administration on government efficiency. The 2020, Project 2025 was like, a big campaign thing. And I read through Project 2025. And while there's like some extreme conservative elements of it, because through a think tank called the Heritage Foundation, the idea that government has gotten bloated, the idea that there's a lot of unelected bureaucrats that are making decisions for the American citizens, I understand the dangers of that. So our founding fathers understood the dangers of that. So to have a libertarian like Ron Paul join up with someone who understands efficiencies like Elon Musk, you add that to RFK, who I was going to vote for. You add that to Tulsi Gabbard, who would be my number one choice. And you add that to Donald Trump, who I am, again, not a huge fan of. But I understand he's also been maligned in an unfair way. Fair ways and unfair ways. It just becomes very clear in this binary system that I'm now going to vote for Donald Trump. One of the things that I remember from years ago in like the crypto kind of like runs is Elon Musk started Dogecoin. It had like a dog on it, and it was like I don't know if he started it, but he got behind it. Doge, DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. I don't know if that was like always the plan, but that's something that I think is really interesting. When I started my social media and podcasting, I was really interested in what Eric Weinstein called the intellectual dark web. So it was people like, Dave Rubin and Joe Rogan and Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein and Christina Hoff Sommers. Barry Weiss wrote a New York Times article on them. And that was the people that I really liked. It was Ben Shapiro. It was Sam Harris. These were people who disagreed ideologically, but they all agreed on certain things like the importance of free speech. And I believe all members of the intellectual dark web are getting behind Trump, except for Sam Harris. So it's like, people who've gone over a full Republican, like Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, who's been a Republican, but also, Brett Weinstein. Brett Weinstein was a Birkenstock wearing, Bernie Sanders supporting hippie, college professor, and now he's voting for Donald Trump. So instead of saying all these people who I admired, lost their mind because they're going for Trump, it made me really curious to go, okay, well, then I might be missing something here. I think that Sam Harris not supporting him, I think Sam Harris is probably the biggest win for Trump derangement syndrome. Sam Harris is a very smart guy, but I think he does not see Donald Trump clearly. I think he really struggles to be objective when it comes to Donald Trump. So the only IDW member that is not on board for Trump is Sam Harris. And I don't think Sam Harris is seeing this clearly. I've disagreed with Sam Harris in some of the things that he said that were really wacky. For a guy that talks about making sense, I don't think he's always making sense right now when it just comes to Donald Trump. I think that Trump does break people's brains. And I think that, Brett Weinstein going from Bernie to Trump, I think a lot of people went from Bernie to Trump. I think that if Bernie would have been given a fair deal and it would have been Bernie versus Trump in 2016, I think Bernie would have won. I do. And as, outlandish as you might say his economic policies could be, as a democratic socialist, I think there's enough safety guards and guardrails and stuff like that against the president that he wouldn't be able to institute anything really socialistic. He would be balanced out. But I do think that if you put those two, one from the left, one from the right, outliers, those mavericks, those renegades pushing back against the system, I think Bernie would have won. But instead, he was screwed over. And the people who supported Bernie Sanders, I mean, look, the only campaign that I've ever given money to for the president was Bernie Sanders back in 2016. I donated whatever it was, $20, $30. I was one of those people that he said, we got thousands of people who were donating $25 at a time. I was one of those people. Because I do like what he's saying. He talks about how the average American is being screwed over by corporate America. And I think that there's more of a chance that under Trump, the corporate influence of corporate media and all of that would be held to more control and have less power under a Trump administration. If Trump is the one who's challenging the status quo, there's something scary about challenging the status quo. There's something scary about talking about massive changes to the system. But there's also something scary about keeping the system the way that it is. So both of them have their dangers, kind of like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. But the idea that Trump represents of challenging the status quo and challenging the people who have been at the very tip top of politics and wealth and power in America, challenging that is actually very American. If you look at the history of America, America was established by the Sons of Liberty and the Founding Fathers who were renegades against the system and said, we can do something better. And when you look at the Make America Healthy Again, talking about how fast food restaurants should use beef tallow instead of vegetable oil, and we should get better promotion of exercise and all of those kinds of things that make America healthy again. Getting rid of chemicals in food. That's very, very American. I don't know if it's going to happen, but the fact that they're talking about it is appealing to me. I have concerns about the way that if Trump loses, how he will deny the election results. I don't see a way that Kamala Harris wins and Trump goes, okay, it's all good. I think that there's already seeds being planted by his supporters, by himself, about how this election is going to be rigged. He's still talking about how the 2020 election was rigged. Was the 2020 election rigged? I think that when people talk about that, they're missing the point. They're like, well, it went to courts, and the courts all said that there wasn't sufficient evidence. There's different ways that you can rig an election. There was a documentary that came out 20 years ago called Hacking Democracy, about how voting machines get things wrong and voting machines can be hacked. Okay, it's very interesting. It was promoted kind of on the side of pro-Democrat, 20 years ago. But aside from that, it doesn't have to be that way, but I don't think we can dismiss that blindly. But lawsuits and courts are saying that there's not enough evidence for that. So, okay. But aside from even hacking machines, we have to look at the reality of this really interesting bond between big tech and government. Mark Zuckerberg talked about that. The Twitter files show that. If the government is working with big tech companies to silence news, to silence information, very famously about COVID, very famously about the Hunter Biden laptop. If media companies are working to be the gatekeepers for what information gets out there, leading up to an election, is that not voter fraud? I mean, it seems like, or election fraud. Isn't that election fraud if media companies are only releasing certain information? So I think when we talk about election fraud, I think that there's a difference between pulling up trucks full of ballots that are all phony or hacking into a Dominion machine and recognizing that the government is going to do a very, multi-year witch hunt about Russia collusion. That's just not true. I mean, it's just a lot of bad press. Trump gets a lot of bad press. You do bad press, bad press, bad press, bad press. You silence news stories that are anti-Biden. You highlight news stories that are anti-Trump, even if they're not true. You do that before an election. Isn't that election fraud? And I think that that's the way that I see as far as the election fraud stuff. Now, that's still going to be the case in 2024 because there's a lot of news organizations that are going to promote, fake news stories. There's going to be a lot of things that are anti-Trump. But there's also now, I think, a better balance of conservative news that's going to kind of go to the other direction and contradict the mainstream news narratives. So I do have concerns over Trump, his willingness to concede if he does lose. I really do. I think that it could be really, really bad if he loses and the American people think that it was fraudulent. A lot of people do. A lot of reasonable people think that the election, the only way that he's going to lose is if it's fraudulent. And that's a huge concern for me. I believe that Trump has a lot of support because I have never seen such open support for Donald Trump. I mean, I've changed my mind on voting for him when I said I never would. And I live in Los Angeles, which is very, very blue, obviously. And I've seen so many Trump flags on trucks. I've seen so many Trump stickers. I see people openly wearing pro-Trump gear. I've never seen that. I've never seen that in past elections. And I see that now. So that's making me think oh, okay. So if people are more willing to be open about it, there's more celebrities coming out for Donald Trump than in previous years. People are just less ashamed to say that they're Donald Trump supporters. It's become more acceptable. And that tells me that he's going to get more votes as well. Is Trump a liar? I think there's an interesting difference between the way that Trump lies and the way a lot of politicians like a Kamala Harris or a Joe Biden lies. I think that traditional politicians like a Kamala Harris or a Joe Biden, I think they're liars. I think they say things that are not true to push their political agenda. I think Trump is more of sorry, pardon my language, but a bullshitter. I think Trump is a BSer. I think Trump is like a used car salesman who's just going to say things. He just kind of talks and goes off on these weird tangents. He talks about the weave. He weaves all these different ideas. I think he's a BSer. He'll say things like no one's kinder to women or no one cares about the handicapped or the needy more than Donald Trump. Is that a lie? Well, yeah, it's a lie, but he's just BSing his way kind of through things. That's the way he does. He's a real estate developer from New York. He's like a real New Yorker, and he BSs through things. But I think there's a difference between being a liar and being a BSer. I think you see more on the front. You know who Donald Trump is. You see him. You know what he's all about. If you're an objective viewer, you're like, yeah, he BSs things. He says crazy stuff. He uses hyperbolic speech constantly. It's the best. It's the worst. That's just the way he talks. Where the more polished, savvy politician types, they just lie. And it's hard to tell where they actually stand on things. It's hard to tell what they actually believe. And that's kind of where I'm at with Kamala Harris. Is I don't actually know who she is as a person. It's so hard to see because she's such a kind of a cliche political entity. She's like a real politician. And if you call someone a politician, they're gonna think you're insulting them because you don't know where they stand. You don't know where they're genuine, and that's the way I feel. I think Trump is genuine in his kind of persona of being kind of an a-hole, of being, using inflammatory rhetoric, in his commitment to, saying how he's the best and he's the greatest and he can do all things and everyone else are idiots. Anyone who disagrees with him is an idiot. I don't think Trump is racist or sexist. I think that if there was a disabled black Muslim lesbian who was like, yeah, I love Trump, he'd be like, oh, that's my person. Like, I think that he's just a narcissist. And a lot of politicians are, but I think he's like a real, like, classic narcissist. But as far as the difference in the way that they're dishonest to the American people, I think that there is a difference there. This is a very interesting election. I don't know what's going to happen. I think that there's a lot of people that are scared, rightfully so, because the rhetoric has just been ramped up to 1,000. Because if it bleeds, it leads, and that's where the media is going for it. I want to talk a lot about these issues. My social media is not great for having productive conversations. So I want to invite my listeners to join my discussion community called the Paradox Roundtable. The Paradox Roundtable is a community that's going to have a Telegram channel. It has a Zoom get-togethers. It's just a way to get rid of the censorship and bots and trolls that are on traditional social media, and a way to really connect with my audience and the people that want to have these kinds of conversations. So if you want to talk about the election, you want to talk about any kind of controversial issue, the way to do that is going to be through the Paradox Roundtable. So if you go to www.paradox.com/roundtable, you can sign up and you can join this community that I'm really excited to facilitate, because it's what I wanted to do with social media all of this time, and it just wasn't great, especially as it grew. I just got a lot of people that are just trying to disrupt positive conversations and productive conversations among people who think differently. So paradox.com/roundtable is the place you can go if you want to just watch the conversations happen, you want to engage in the conversations. I would love to be able to engage with my audience, because I have so much to learn from the diverse people that follow the podcast, that follow the accounts. And I want to engage more, and I want to be able to do that in a place that I feel like we can just talk about everything. We can talk about race and gender. We can talk about vaccines. We can talk about really anything and not get censored, not get shut down, because even on X, I just don't trust it. Can you talk negative things about Elon Musk on X? I mean, I think so, but I don't know. So I built the Paradox Roundtable. I'm really excited to get that going. So this is a little bit just like a few things to think about when it comes to this election. The past 6 months leading up to the election day have been so crazy. They've been so crazy. Trump was shot. They replaced Joe Biden. I mean, all these people, as I mentioned, joined up with Trump. Trump was convicted of like 34 felonies. He was also found liable for sexual assault. Like, it's been crazy. Joe Biden has gotten like senile to the point where it's like unbelievably undeniable. It's been a really interesting reality show leading up to this election. So I hope that this gave you a few things to just think about, a few other perspectives, then also sharing why I decided to throw my support on the side of Donald Trump when I said that I never would. So would love to hear more of your thoughts. Would love to see you on the Paradox Roundtable. Thank you guys so much for listening.